This is Joe's Corner 76. I will be discussing the human condition. In order to change it, we have to be involved. Is the world better than you think? Is the world going to hell in a handbasket? It seems pretty easy to believe that the world is falling apart when you watch the news. Climate change, political division, coups d'etats, the global pandemic, Russia's ruthless war on Ukraine, Hamas's unjustifiable killings, and the Middle East careening towards widespread violence. Before panicking and losing our objectivity, it may be worth stepping back to get some perspective. We are driven to fear and we become demoralized by the media, particularly if we're young, and it gives rise to terrible political decisions by crippling our ability to do better. War is horrible, and it is understandable and even necessary that the media spotlights today's conflicts. This can make us believe we are living through unprecedented violence. Russia's war indeed meant that the battle deaths in 2022 reached a high for this century, but they are very low by historical records. Last year, 3.5 in 100,000 people died as a consequence of war, below even 1980s and far below the 20th century average of 30 per 100,000. The world, in fact, has become more peaceful. This doesn't mean much for those living in conflict zones. The data shows that the problem created by the constant barrage of catastrophe and doom, looking at the media content in over 130 countries from 1970 to 2010, shows that the emotional tone has dramatically and consistently become more negative. Negativity sells, but it informs badly. The same negative pattern is shown in climate change reporting. These doomsdayers widely spread false and negative stories that suggest we face an apocalypse with every event that occurs. Last summer, for example, forest fires made headlines, but the coverage failed to mention that the annual burned global areas have been declining for decades, reaching the lowest level ever last year. Studies show 84% of forest fires are caused by humans. This doesn't get mentioned. Deaths from droughts and floods fill the front pages, but we don't hear that deaths from such climate-related deaths have declined 50-fold over the last century. Data shows us what we fundamentally know. The world has improved dramatically. Life expectancy has more than doubled since 1900. 2 centuries ago, almost everyone was illiterate. Now, almost everyone can read. In 1820, nearly 90% of people lived in extreme poverty. Now, it's less than 10%. Indoor pollution has declined dramatically, and its outdoor equivalent has also done so in rich countries. If we could choose when to be born, knowing all the facts, few would choose any time before today. This undeniable progress has been driven by ethical and responsible conduct, well-functioning markets, the rule of law, scientific innovation, and political stability. We all have to recognize, appreciate, and talk about it, the value, and how rare each of these are. Constant flood of negative stories may lead us to imagine that the forward progress we have made is about to end. However, the evidence at hand does not support the conclusion. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change scenarios indicate that, if not for climate change, the average person would be 4.5 times richer by the end of the century than they are today. Climate change will merely slow progress, such that the average person will only be 4.34 times richer by the end of the century. This by no means indicates the end of the world. Yet, fear pushes many to demand an inefficient diversion of hundreds of trillions of dollars to steer the global economy abruptly towards zero carbon emissions. We need to promote an environment that challenges fear-mongering and promotes optimistic yet critical thinking and constructive discussion about the future. The hope is that the new Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which hosts its first international conference in London in November, will be able to help in this regard by bringing people of goodwill and good sense together from around the world to formulate and communicate a positive vision of the future. To drive progress for the world's poorest, we should also focus on efficient and well-documented policies that provide enormous benefits for these people. Working with more than 100 of the world's top economists, it's helped identify the best solutions to many of the world's most insidious problems. Basic tuberculosis treatment that will save 1 million people a year. Land tenure reforms that lets poor people reap the benefits. Education technology that can deliver 3 times better learning outcomes and more. These policies don't make catchy headlines, but they do an immense amount of good. For a cost of $35 billion annually, they would save an astounding 4.2 million lives annually and make the poorer half of the world $1.1 trillion richer each year. Stop being driven by fear. Instead, look to the data and the bigger picture. We can see that the world is better than it was and is likely to get better still. It is our responsibility to push for and adopt the very best policies to move ahead. Do you agree? If so, do something. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram at Joe's Corner 76. You can hear me on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube at Joe's Corner 76. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Joe's Corner 76. If you enjoyed this podcast, tell your friends that there are many more you can catch on Spotify and YouTube at Joe's Corner 76.